Now we'll start the webinar. I'll just give it a minute for everybody to come in. Hi, folks. Welcome. We'll take just a minute to pause and let everybody join us. But thank you for getting here at 2 p.m. Well, noon for most people on a Thursday. All right. We have a fantastic crowd today. I'm watching the attendee numbers jump through the roof. So this has been a great event to start. Okay, why don't we get started? Hi, folks. Welcome to our Pluribus Spotlight on housing in Colorado. I'm Reed Wilson, the founder and editor of Pluribus News, and I'm excited for the conversation that we're going to have today. First, I want to thank our sponsor, the American Planning Association, for making today's event possible. We will hear more from them a little later on. But we wanted to hold this event because this is becoming the year of housing policy in states across the country. We've seen zoning issues, rent laws, and building codes pop up in legislatures everywhere because housing is as much of a crisis in urban America as it is in rural America, which I think you'll hear from some of our panelists today. And in all my years covering what's happening at the state level, I don't think any state has been roiled by the housing crisis as much as Colorado has been. The population booms in Denver and Boulder are as much of a problem as zonings and multifamily issues in the mountain towns and everywhere else. So today we get to hear from 4 people with a lot of knowledge about Colorado's housing debate. Later on, we'll be joined by Senator Faith Winter and Representative Judy Amabile. Wait, I screwed that up already. She's gonna correct me. Amabile. She'll correct me when I'm in here. Sorry about that. To talk about what's happening at the Capitol. But our first panel, we're happy to welcome Littleton Mayor Kyle Schlachter and my colleague Sophie Quinton, Pluribus News' economics correspondent. So let me introduce Littleton Mayor Kyle Schlachter, who first won his seat on the city council in 2017. In 2021, he won election to become Littleton's first popularly elected mayor. In his free time, which I doubt he has very much of, he's the executive director of the Colorado Wine Industry Development Board. And in 2017, he was named one of the 40 under 40 tastemakers by Wine Enthusiast magazine. So he is singing my tune. Welcome, Mayor Schlachter. Let me start with the sort of on the ground perspective. You're in the Denver suburbs, feeling the squeeze of all this new population growth. What are the housing challenges that Littleton faces today?
Well, good afternoon, Reed. Thanks for having me here to talk about this important topic. Every community in the Denver area is feeling and dealing with the challenges of population growth differently. Here in Littleton, one of our biggest challenges is that we're landlocked. We're mostly built out, and so is the surrounding area. 40 years ago, we were the edge of growth in the area. The southern half of our city was just being built at that time. The 1990s is when development moved south across C-470 and past Littleton. So adding housing to an already built out community is probably the greatest challenge that we have. Changes to zoning that are too broad risk displacing families and entire neighborhoods. So good planning that is specific to each area is really important. And, that's one of the things that we've been doing here in Littleton. I think we've been doing pretty well. We've had some recent redevelopment. And there are a few pockets of greenfield development, and I'll show what kind of talk about that as we get into some of the coming questions here. I think you're on mute, Reed.
Sorry about that. I had a car going by. I didn't want to screw it up. Housing is such a diverse set of issues all rolled into one. How do you go about identifying the challenges that Littleton faces and then prioritizing them? You can't do everything at once.
No, you can't. That's pretty much the root challenge for state and local governments. About 8 years ago, the city updated our comprehensive plan. And that was step one. It was important for 2 reasons. One, because it hadn't been updated in 40 years. And second, it was accompanied by a transportation master plan. And that didn't even exist in Littleton before. And so that was really important to get those under our belt here. And, as everyone knows, a lot changes in 40 years. So it was really important to take that step. And one of the key parts of our comp plan was to focus on housing and neighborhoods. At that time, we estimated that by 2040, we would need about 6,500 additional housing units to accommodate up to 15,000 new residents in our city here. One of our key action plans was to develop a housing advisory committee that was comprised of residents, real estate and development professionals, and our housing authority representatives. And the point of that was to focus on the details and logistics from the comprehensive plan and implementing some of our recommendations from our 2017 housing study that preceded the comp plan. And this work continues today. So that was really the impetus to lay the groundwork for moving forward here and prioritizing housing in Littleton.
Yeah, yeah. So what is the city doing to produce a more diverse and affordable housing supply?
So another action apart from the advisory committee that was taken as a result of the comprehensive plan was a complete update of our land use code in 2021. Because of these code changes, we're seeing good progress addressing these land use and housing challenges now. So what we did with the core updates was to first focus on our corridors. That's where we have our light rail transit and hope to have bus rapid transit, and updating the zoning to allow for mixed residential and commercial development. These were the main areas where we are now seeing some of this redevelopment. If you're familiar with the Denver area, we have Aspen Grove, Columbine Square, and there's some vacant land south of the intersection of Mineral and Santa Fe. Along with these changes to our land use, we streamlined the process for developers to utilize the expanded uses in this new code. So now a lot of the process is administrative. Very large changes go to the Planning Commission, but don't really come to City Council. We've heard good things from the development community about that. And so with these changes, we now have approximately 1,500 units in the pipeline, and they're starting to come out of the ground this year. So we've also expanded areas where ADUs make sense. Continue that discussion to this day. Unfortunately, ADUs are not being built in great numbers, and it's not because of the zoning, but because the cost is so expensive to build them. So secondly, our city council unanimously approved an inclusionary housing ordinance, IHO, in November of 2022. And so we were the sixth city in the metro area to adopt a policy that establishes a fund for affordable housing and requires developers to build new housing. So now new residential development of at least 5 units, anything bigger than five or more units, now must include at least 5% of them as being affordable. Or they can pay a fee in lieu to help the city and our housing authority to build these units. So the fee in lieu was actually set pretty high to encourage the units being built by the developers. So we offer various incentives, height, open space, setbacks, things like that, for building the units. And we can go beyond those incentives for majority affordable developments. So we really have 2 tiers of incentives depending on the type of development. So affordable for sale means the unit required to be affordable for those making 80% of the AMI. And affordable for rent means 60% of AMI. And so this didn't come overnight. You know, Littleton's IHO was 5 years in the making, beginning with that housing study in 2017, and then our comprehensive plan in 2019. So it takes time to make these impactful changes like our IHO are doing here in Littleton.
Yeah, I think if we've learned anything about housing policy, it takes a long time to get all the stakeholders in place. We're going to talk a little bit more about the ADUs, the alternative dwelling units, down the line here. But you mentioned that Littleton is landlocked. You're surrounded by other cities. I'm really curious to know, how much are you working with your neighboring mayors? I mean, is there a lot of inner city coordination going on in terms of sort of, you build X, we'll build Y, or how does that work?
So I'm some people may know that I'm the second vice chair of the Metro Mayor's Caucus here in the metro area. And our area mayors get together and we talk regularly. I have lunch with my neighboring Arapahoe County mayors once a month. Had lunch with them yesterday. So we talk about what's going on in each community. And as being a local elected official, as most people know, it's not a full-time job, for better or worse. The most important thing is that our city staffs talk to each other and they coordinate. They're the ones doing the day-to-day work. So our communities have lots of things in common, but at the same time, we're also very unique. For example, some of my neighbors, like Cherry Hills Village, has 0 multifamily in their city. And Glendale has 0, or sorry, Cherry Hills Village has 0 multifamily, and Glendale has 0 single family. So there are other communities with lots of undeveloped land, but Littleton's built out. We have a 50-50 split between single family and multifamily. So the solutions to our challenges, can and should look different in each community. And we talk about what we're doing. We're not trading things like, well, you build this development, we'll build that development. But we are talking And we're keenly aware of what everyone else is doing.
Gotcha. A little later on, as I said, we're going to hear from some leading state lawmakers who are crafting housing legislation up at the Capitol. What's your message to them? What can the state do to support Littleton and your neighbors to meet their housing supply goals?
Well, I want to be the first to say that the goals and outcomes that the governor and members of the General Assembly have stated are the same goals and outcomes we local officials have. We all want to increase the housing supply and bring the cost of housing down. But how we work towards those outcomes really matters. Homes don't just pop out of the ground like tulips. They take time, and importantly, they take teamwork. The biggest thing that the state can do is to be a partner with the local cities here. I'm not making a claim to this phrase, but we need partnership and not preemption on housing and land use issues. Incentives are key to getting things done. There's enough communities that want to keep pushing forward on housing that incentive-based approach is going to work. We can look at the interest in Proposition 123 here in Colorado. Even without state incentives, communities like Arapahoe County have more than 120,000 units that are entitled and ready to come out of the ground. Local governments have approved them. The development community could use some help with supply chain issues and labor force and financing. Something that I think is going to come up, and I hope the legislators talk about, is Senate Bill 106. Passing that to reform the construction litigation will go a long way to bring down the cost to build for sale multifamily units. That's a product that just hasn't been built in the last decade here in Colorado, and not because zoning forbids it. Multifamily for sale housing like condos is critically important because it helps close the affordability gap. It adds an element to a diverse mix of housing options that we can offer our residents here in Colorado. It's historically the most affordable owner-occupied housing option, and it's a path to home ownership. A condo is how I got into ownership. It was my first purchase. Reduced insurance costs by decreasing the magnitude and frequency of claims and providing other measures for consumer protection, resolving disputes, and doing this without sacrificing the standards that we expect for building is a win-win in my eyes. Also, working to bring us high-functioning transit system would help a lot. Here in Littleton, we have developers that won't even use the full extent of the zoning that's allowed because the transit system won't support it. It isn't the zoning that's restricting development here in Littleton per se. So I just, I guess the biggest thing I want to say to our state partners is that local city councils, local planning officials, we truly understand what works and will not work in our communities. The biggest threat to achieving our shared goals is bad policy that doesn't take the unique characteristics of our communities into consideration. Policy that drives us apart doesn't work as well as policy that brings us together. So kind of a one-size-fits-all approach to land use is not necessarily the Colorado way, and we're looking forward to working with each other.
Yeah, we're gonna get to that, the diversity of Colorado in a little bit. So, all right, Littleton Mayor Kyle Schlachter, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
I really appreciate it. I'm going to turn now to my colleague Sophie Quinton, our economics correspondent who covers housing issues and who also happens to be a homeowner in the Denver area, just to add a little benefit there. Sophie, you've been digging into Governor Polis's proposal, $136 million that he laid out in his State of the State address. Tell us what's in it.
Sure. Hi, Reed. Thanks for having me here today to talk a little bit about these issues. Current homeowner, former renter. So like many of the people on this call, I'm well aware of some of the housing challenges Colorado faces. I would say looking at what the governor has proposed in new spending on housing for this year, one of the centerpieces of his plan is really supporting transit-oriented development. So, new buildings and new density around bus stops, rail stations, that kind of thing. His budget proposes $35 million to help fund local infrastructure around transit to support more development, things like sewer upgrades, that kind of thing. And he's got another $30 million in there that would kind of expand affordable housing tax credits with a focus on financing projects near transit. There are a lot of sort of smaller initiatives in his bill. you know, sort of another kind of big ticket item was converting some grant money into affordable housing tax credit money. But there were two smaller proposals that caught my eye. One is he wants to set aside and spend $18 million to subsidize the building of accessory dwelling units. So this is what Mayor Schlachter was just talking about, these kind of granny flats, people call them, you know, they're sort of standalone units you can put in your backyard or maybe over your garage and rent them out to, you know, let a relative live there or rent them out to someone local. So the governor has proposed, you know, setting aside some money in the state budget to help localities sort of subsidize the fees that it takes to get these things permitted and get them approved. And he also would put that money towards subsidizing construction of them too. And he's also got another $5 million in the budget to support converting commercial buildings, so office buildings, into residential buildings. I thought that was interesting because we're hearing so much these days about how remote work is changing, how people are using office buildings, particularly, you know, in downtowns, and this idea of how do we, you know, use some of these properties that are currently sitting empty to help increase the housing supply is something that, you know, folks in Colorado and beyond are focused on.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. I know that the legislators, Representative Amabile and Senator Winter, have busy schedules. So Sophie, we're going to pause it right there. We'll hear a brief message from the American Planning Association, come back to the legislators, and then I want you and I to wrap this whole thing up when we're right back.
Planners see possibility everywhere. The new homes in surprising spots. Green spaces, cut off places. The transit plans and traffic jams. Solutions where you'd least expect. Seeing what can be in what is takes vision, data-driven discipline, and expertise. It takes a collaborative spirit to ensure a community's needs and potential are met. It takes supporting decision makers with inspiration and insight so they can enact real change, like key zoning reforms to support growing communities. It takes a planner.
All right. Our thanks once again to the American Planning Association. We'll hear a little bit more about them in a little bit, but I want to welcome our two legislators now. Senator Faith Winter is serving her second term in the Senate, where she represents parts of Adams, Broomfield, and Weld counties. She's just a few months into her new job as Assistant Majority Leader. So welcome and congratulations, Senator Winter.
Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be here and talk about housing today.
Fantastic. We're also joined by Representative Judy Amabile, serving her second term representing Boulder. She's the chair of the House Business Affairs and Labor Committee and a member of the House Appropriations Committee. So Representative Amabile, welcome. Let me start with you. You're in one of the most expensive housing markets in the country. Tell us a little bit about sort of what your constituents are facing. Oh, you might still be on mute. Oh, no. No, still can't hear you. Okay, we'll try to fix Representative Amabile's audio, but Senator Winter, let me turn to you. Housing has been an issue in Colorado for as long as I've watched state politics. I mean, give us sort of the statewide picture. Why is housing such a big priority for lawmakers in the last few years?
Ultimately, housing impacts your quality of life. It's where you gather, where you spend time with your family. It's where you leave and come back from every time you go to work or the doctor or to schools. And we simply, one, don't have enough housing in the state for our population. It's not affordable and it's not located in appropriate places to really move people around efficiently. And whether we're talking about the Eastern Plains and rural areas to mountain resort towns, to the suburbs and the cities, where you live, how you live, what you live in really impacts your everyday life. And we need to do better, and we have to do better. And we're having that conversation right now.
Gotcha. I know, and it's been such a huge lift for so many times. The big housing package that died on the floor last year died a long death, I gather, after it gave everybody something to hate. What do you think can be done this year to promote sort of more diverse, attainable, and equitable housing?
I think we're doing a lot of work to address each of those issues. And I think one of the most important things we're doing is we're not just addressing the housing issue. We know that housing is very, very linked to transportation. It's linked to our education system. And it's linked to our climate change goals. And if we're going to meet all these goals, we have to ensure that we're working on all of those goals together and that we are being additive and enhancing instead of competing against, having those goals compete against each other. So I think you will see a lot of concentration around transit-oriented communities and how we increase density and affordability, and how we make those a reality in the state, both through support and help, and working with our local government partners.
Yeah. Speaking of those local government partners, I mean, we heard from Mayor Schlachter about advancing some initiatives in Littleton and other cities that are where they're trying new things. I mean, how do you see the state's role in helping those cities reach their goals?
First we, and I think your name's Sarah, was that correct?
Sophie.
Okay, Sophie, you talked about the governor's plan, and he is adding additional money into the housing pot. So we're going to have grants around transit-oriented communities. And if you're establishing housing, you can apply for those grants. We are offering some technical help. We're making sure that folks have housing plans, so we know the lay of the land of where housing is across the state. And it really is a statewide issue. And so when it is a statewide issue, we have to ensure that we have basic minimums and also support. And it's really important. When I was a Westminster City Councilor, I did a lot to increase affordable housing. Unfortunately, our current council has gone backwards. And so I think that is one of the ways that shows that we really do need some statewide minimums and statewide support.
Gotcha. Okay. I think we have Representative Amabile back. Representative, welcome.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
We got you just fine. That's perfect. You sponsored accessory dwelling unit legislation. We heard Mayor Schlachter talking about that earlier. Tell us about the bill. I mean, why are these ADUs catching on so much these days?
Yeah, well, I think for a lot of different reasons. One is affordability. Another is people want to age in place. So they want to be able to either get some income off of their property and use that to help offset rising property taxes. Or they want to have a caregiver live adjacent to them or take care of a loved one. Like I have a disabled son who I would like to be able to have live not with me because his disability makes that very difficult, but to have live nearby. And I know that a lot of people are grappling with those same issues. The approach we're taking in this bill is a carrot and a stick. So yes, there's a mandate. It's pretty minimal. And then we are also offering financial incentives. And like you described, there's incentives for the homeowner to build through low interest loans. And then there's incentives for the city to reduce fees for low income or low to middle income homeowners who want to build an ADU. So, and then as part of the stick, we're saying, hey, you have to allow it in a single family zone, in a metropolitan planning organization, in a city of a certain size. And you cannot mandate home ownership or owner occupancy, and you can't mandate that people have to provide parking. They're allowed to provide parking, but you can't mandate that because those are two things that the data has shown really lower the number of ADUs that get built. So I heard Mayor Schlachter say, well, we're just not getting very many ADUs because they're expensive. And that's true. And we're trying to address that with some of these incentives. But also some of the regulations, and I don't know what it is in Littleton, but in my town, you have to own or occupy. And that makes it harder to get a loan. It makes it less flexible for a homeowner, and it puts a deed restriction on that a lot of people don't want because they feel like that might affect their ability to resell. So those are a few of the things that we're doing with the bill. We have had actually really good support, and we're having a lot of support from towns. And the other thing that I hear is that there's mayors who have come to me and said, look, I can't get this through my city because we have a group of very vocal opponents and they keep shutting it down. But we know that 78% of Coloradans support this policy. And they're saying to me, please get this done at the state level so that we can have this here and we can blame you all instead of taking the heat ourselves.
So mayors actually want the preemption in this case to take the heat off of them.
Yep.
Can you give us a sense? I mean, Sophie and I are going to talk a little later about ADU legislation coming up in other states, but when we talk about these things, I wonder, what's realistic to expect? I mean, how many units are we really talking about here when Mayor Schlachter is talking about 1,500 units coming out of the ground just in the next couple of years?
Yeah, so ADUs are not the solution to our housing crisis. They're just a piece of the puzzle, and certainly not the biggest piece, but they also solve some other problems besides just housing availability. And so that's why I think they're important. In terms of how many, the city of Durango has a very relaxed ADU policy. I have two kids that went to college there. They're everywhere and they're nice. And they've had this effect that the college kids can find a place to live that's affordable and that they don't have to scramble years in advance to find it. And they're distributed all over the city and they're living with adults adjacent to them. And that's had all these other benefits, I think, for the city of Durango, which is that they have a really good relationship with their college because the students aren't all concentrated in one neighborhood and they have to be more responsible because that's been a requirement for them. So I think if we have the less restrictive policies, we will get more ADUs. And I think there's probably a fairly straight line between those things.
Representative Amabile, I know you've got to leave pretty soon, so I'm going to lob one more at you and then get back to Senator Winter. Just today, we're seeing reports that Representative Vigil and Senator Priola have proposed banning parking minimums in Colorado cities. And I gather that's to do with structures that are larger than just an ADU. That's for multifamily units and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the strategy of eliminating parking minimums as a way to goose housing?
Yeah. Well, okay. So the ADU bill says you can't require that somebody provide parking, but also if they want to provide parking, they can. And I certainly see that in many situations, people need cars, and especially working people who, maybe have to work someplace that's not very near where they live, that isn't accessed by transit. And so I do think we have to be careful to not put an undue hardship on the people who are already economically stressed. But I think that for the most part, developers understand the calculation that people are making. And so I don't think we have to force them to have a certain parking minimum. I think they're going to do what is economically the right move for them. So depending on the location, they will provide more or less housing. Parking to go along with the housing that they're building. And so I think it's a reasonable request, and that it won't really change things all that much, but it will stop the forcing of building parking where none is needed.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Representative Judy Amabile, we'll let you go there, and that's a perfect segue back to Senator Winter. Senator Winter, you're the chair of the
Thank
Transportation.
you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good one. Senator Winter, you chair the Transportation and Energy Committee. And I mean, as we just talked about, transportation and housing are just so intertwined. Can you talk a little bit about how you think about sort of marrying mass transit and housing development, and sort of how those two go together in your own thinking?
Absolutely. We really need to increase transit throughout the state. And there's several ways that we are doing that. The first is CDOT is doing a lot more public transit than they used to do. CDOT would only build roads and bridges, and now they're operating bus staying and snow staying, and they're getting ready to open up some pretty big corridors of bus rapid transit. So the first one is actually going to be opening on Federal, and we'll go all the way from 120th down to South Denver with bus rapid transit. And that creates a lot of opportunity to increase that density and affordability of housing around those stops. And it's attractive to developers, it's attractive to employers, and attractive to people that want to live in a place where transit is accessible. And so we are working on a bill this year that provides grants and funding and requirements for local communities to increase affordability and density around transit centers. And then in Colorado, we do most of our transit through local agencies. And so we're also working on a bill to make sure we're supporting those local agencies. So how are we ensuring if one of the local agencies, like RTD, for example, is allowed to build more dense and affordable housing? We're not requiring parking because we don't want to take up an entire transit center with just parking. How do we give them tools to use things like tax increment financing on land owned by transit agencies? And then we have increased the amount of money that we are spending on transit across the state. So we are drastically increasing our multimodal option fund. And so we're looking at how much and how fast can we fund the multimodal option fund, and how do we make it accessible where it's really driving these transit-oriented corridors and transit-oriented corridor developments. Also, Colorado has more rural transit than any other state in the country, which is something to be really proud of, because we know that transit-oriented corridors aren't just in the Denver metro area, but really can be statewide, and making sure that we're providing those services across the state.
Yeah, gotcha. Something that Mayor Schlachter brought up, Colorado is, as I said at the top, is a very diverse state, from big city Denver to the booming suburbs to the mountain towns in the rural east. How do you, as a legislator, how do you take that into account, all the unique problems that so many different types of community face?
I think by offering enough flexibility on how to meet our goals. So, for example, I set our climate goals within the state, and we don't use just one thing to meet our climate goals. We're electrifying vehicles, we're increasing transit, we're shutting down coal plants. And so if we're setting goals for housing and statewide goals for housing, how do we provide that similar flexibility of using everything from ADUs to increasing density, to increasing the amount of money that the state has in response to local communities? Because what happens in Littleton is going to be different than what happens in Vail. And Vail knows what they need to increase density and affordability. Littleton is going to know what they need to increase density and affordability. So we're asking all our local governments to come together and say, let's agree to these goals. And then as the state, we're trying to write it in such a flexible way that they can meet those goals we agree to in ways that locally make sense.
Yeah, gotcha. As I mentioned as well, you're the assistant majority leader, you know the legislative strategy too. And there's a last question for you. Last year, the bill, a big omnibus package, died because, again, everybody had something to hate in it. What's your strategy for getting elements of the Democratic agenda through the legislature this year?
I think we started doing stakeholder work much earlier this year and more intentionally especially with our local government partners. So we just had our 11th meeting with local government partners on transit-oriented communities and really shaping the bill around what would work for our local partners. And I think bringing folks in early and really listening has been exceptionally helpful. Also working that the big bill did a lot. And some people like some elements and some people hated elements, and everyone hated something. And so I think breaking it up into different pieces with specific policy goals. So for example, having the ADU bill, having a parking bill, having a transit bill is going to be really important in terms of making sure that we're adding that flexibility from the state level, but also working with stakeholders in a way that's incorporating all their feedback.
Gotcha. All right. Senator Faith Winter, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. And we're going to keep a close eye on what happens in Colorado, because I think a lot of other states are going to be looking at you to figure out what they should be doing next.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. It's good to see everyone.
Nice to see you too. All right, let me switch back to Sophie Quinton, our economics correspondent today. Sophie, sorry to interrupt there, but I wanted to make sure we got plenty of time with the lawmakers. You were talking about a lot of what Governor Polis was doing, is proposing in his budget, and what the lawmakers are working on. A lot of what we've talked about with Representative Amabile and with Mayor Schlachter and Senator Winter have to do with these accessory dwelling units. And I feel like this is becoming the latest trend in the state. So can you give us sort of a sense of like, what are other states across the country doing right now?
Yes, absolutely. So this, creating a statewide zoning, creating a statewide law that basically says people are allowed to build ADUs in their backyards, has sort of emerged as like a low-hanging fruit land use reform. So I was taking a look at some numbers this morning. I don't know if this is current as to this moment, but as of some numbers I was looking at from last year, there are 8 states that now have laws on the books that allow ADUs statewide. So that would be California, Connecticut, Maine, New Hampshire, Oregon, Utah, Virginia, and Washington. Colorado, of course, is one of the states considering an ADU bill this year, but there are others. Close readers of our fabulous Pluribus AM newsletter will note that we included a Rhode Island bill, an ADU bill, in the newsletter just this morning. And I think, as the lawmakers said earlier, this is something that is kind of, it just seems like it makes sense to do. There are ways to do it that provide flexibility. And I loved what Representative Amabile was saying about sort of folding into the Colorado bill, the easing of parking minimum, the easing of parking requirements, and also this owner occupancy piece. I think California is one state that's had kind of an interesting journey with this. They had a law on the books, I think in the 80s, that allowed ADUs statewide, but it wasn't really until 2016 that lawmakers started really taking a hard look at that and thinking, well, okay, we have this on the books, but how can we actually encourage more construction? And they've passed since then a whole slew of laws that look at little pieces of why there might be rules locally or funding challenges locally that are kind of preventing ADUs from actually getting built, and parking restrictions and these owner occupancy requirements were among the things that California has looked at separately. So I think the Colorado bill is a good example of states looking at other states, seeing what's worked, seeing what kind of cleanup lawmakers are doing, states that have gotten there earlier, what challenges they're seeing, and trying to kind of craft the next generation of these ADU laws.
Mm-hmm. And the last thing I'll throw your way that we got into with Senator Winter a little bit, Governor Polis has talked a lot about helping local governments build near transit-oriented neighborhoods and about an affordable housing tax credit. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So he set money aside in his budget for that. And I think that is going to be, it sounds like some of the bills that Senator Winter and others are working on, they're working in tandem with that money in the budget. to advance some of those goals. I haven't done a ton of deep research into what's happening with the affordable housing tax credit in Colorado, but I think there's a mix of like moving some money around by converting grants into tax credits. There's adding additional money that's transit focused. I mean, again, with this goal of increasing more housing and more density around transit and really working, you can sort of see if you look at the budget details and then look at the bills that are coming forward this session, you can kind of see them working in tandem to advance a lot of these goals.
Mhm. Gotcha. Okay. All right. Sophie Quinton, thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. And for sharing your Colorado expertise with the rest of us too. We still have Mayor Schlachter on the line. And actually, Mayor, if you're still around, I have a question from a viewer here who wants to know how residents of Littleton have received changes to zoning and development laws. Are you still able? Aha.
I'm still here, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, let me throw one at you then.
Yeah.
So our viewer Amy asks, how have residents of Littleton received the changes to zoning, development processes, increases in development, etc., and what steps has the city taken to bring residents along if there have been any challenges to that?
So I think it's been mixed. We've had lots of proponents that are pleased with what's going on, and some that any change is bad. So I think that's also part of the process. Is it takes a while to inform the community of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what it means for them, and to maybe alleviate some concerns. But I think it's anywhere you go that you're going to have both sides of the conversation there.
Yeah, gotcha. All right, thanks for letting me throw one more there at you. All right, Mayor Kyle Schlachter of Littleton, Sophie Quinton of Pluribus News. Finally today, I want to go to a conversation that I had earlier this week with Josh Olhava. He's the incoming president of the American Planning Association's Colorado chapter. So let's take it over there and listen right now. I'm happy to welcome Josh Olhava, the president-elect and treasurer of the American Planning Association's Colorado chapter. Josh is the Western Planning Lead at Ayers Associates, a leading multidisciplinary national consulting firm based in Fort Collins. Josh, thanks for being here. Give us a sense of how planning works to make sure that housing reforms succeed at the local level.
Yeah, thank you, Reed. So, planners are leading housing and zoning reforms statewide. We're collaborating daily with local agencies and partners to develop and implement housing action plans. Our experiences as professionals really show that effective reform begins with a well-crafted plan, and that's built in collaboration with our residents and our stakeholders. And it's always informed by a strong, comprehensive, data-driven approach. As professionals, we advocate for adaptable solutions that are tailored to fit the needs of the communities. We also provide essential guidance to local decision makers on implementing these great state reforms at the local level. And of course, this includes navigating change, right? Change is always a part of the process, but really understanding what that change when it comes to zoning updates and how that allows for diverse housing options, which we talk about duplexes, townhomes, sometimes even accessory dwelling units or ADUs, and how those integrate into existing neighborhoods that were once zoned for only single family detached dwellings.
Yeah. How do planners work with localities to help them meet some of these housing production goals?
Yeah, I mean, planners throughout our state continue to work closely with agencies such as the Department of Local Affairs or DOLA here in the state to implement a lot of innovative housing programs. Many successful programs start with local zoning reform to remove the barriers and also allow a variety of housing types to be constructed to meet local housing needs, really coming back to that local need. We have quite a few examples across the state, too many to kind of name them all, but one I want to highlight is a Western community and rural community of Craig, Colorado. In Craig, the city worked with planners to review and revise local regulations that facilitated additional residential densities and housing product types throughout the community. And while these regulations were being updated and finalized, the planners continued to work with the city to pursue and package funding from a variety of sources to build 20 modular townhome units. And the reason modular construction was identified by the city and the planning team was due to local contractor constraints, limitations on capacity, and also building material issues. So really understanding the local context. And what's exciting is these units were recently delivered to the site. which is located within walking distance of the downtown and also nearby schools, fully integrated into an existing neighborhood.
Gotcha. I was going to ask you for some examples. Are there any other towns or cities you'd point to?
Yes, and for the sake of time, I'll mention one more, but a little different angle is looking at a community that recently updated their regulations to really promote diverse housing types. And this example being Severance, Colorado, back here on the Front Range. And for that community that's 90% residential and over 90% of the units are single family detached, that notion of change was really important. And being able to provide the decision makers with data-driven information. And so the planners developed a revenue expenditure analysis that really showed the overall cost of continuing to build with single family detached housing and those impacts on the community. And so what was great is by removing the regulatory barriers that existed and adding requirements for housing diversity within new neighborhoods, now developers and builders will be able to integrate a variety of housing types into their projects, which increases housing supply options and a variety of price points. And this was all done as part of the town's housing needs assessment plan.
Mm-hmm. We've talked a lot about local governments. Take a step back, then give us the Colorado perspective. How can the state chip in to help planners and communities build more housing?
Yeah, state housing reforms really empower planners. It empowers us to unlock new and variety of housing options. Through APA Colorado, our members have extensive experience in housing planning. From conducting housing assessments to identifying housing gaps. We're here to help and be part of the discussions early on when developing these policies and programs. And we look forward to working with the state moving forward.
All right. Josh O'Hava, the president-elect and treasurer of the American Planning Association's Colorado chapter. Josh, thanks for being with us today and thanks for supporting our event.
You bet. Thank you.
All right, 4:49. Whoops. You saw the end of the video there. Thank you, everybody, for being with us today. We really appreciate it. That'll do it for all of us. Thanks again to our sponsors at the American Planning Association for their time and their work. Thanks to Littleton Mayor Kyle Schlachter, Senator Faith Winter, and Representative Judy Amabile, as well as my colleague, Sophie Quinton. And thanks to you for joining today. Much more to come from Pluribus News, including a cool special members-only election briefing with my good friend and old boss, Amy Walter, next week. Keep an eye on your inboxes for that invite. But until then, I'm Reed Wilson. Thank you so much for being a part of the Pluribus News community.